is not an oxymoron, but it's complex, as both films demonstrate. All of the women in the films we viewed chronicle their families' often difficult emigration from Iran and underscore how they all share a deep longing for their countries of birth, or in Josephine's case, the country with which she most identifies. But before we move on to discussing reading Tehran and Tel Aviv, I want to focus on how this concept of longing, in the case of Rita's work, applies. As I think it helps to explain why her music appeals to both people in Iran and to Israel. As you saw in the film, Iranians are elated and proud of Rita's new project. But I found that also other Iranian, non-Iranian Mizrahi writers discuss Rita's project as a special tribute to them, the Mizrahi community in Israel, and an attempt for her to identify herself with this community and the hardship it has suffered. So you don't find that in the film, but this is an expression that a lot of people feel when seeing this film. And as you saw, the film acknowledges that her public persona doesn't really represent actually the actual Rita. Probably many of you know that she was married to Rami Kleinstein, who was a very, very well-known, also Israeli pop star. And the public persona was that they had this perfect life. So this film is very, very big in that sense. So Mizrahim discuss a lot on the internet and in journalism that Rita doesn't discuss the cultural discrimination, but they read between the lines. They discuss their pride and describe their tears at viewing this film. Many Mizrahim were cut off from their roots, but today many artists like Rita are attempting to reconnect with these roots through musical projects, film, poetry, and literature. Rita is the biggest superstar in Israel to have excavated her Middle Eastern roots. Some of you might have seen the Dudu Tassa performance a couple nights ago. And his music was represented in the film Iraq and Roll, and he's somebody who basically excavated his Arabic roots. He had very, very well-known family members who were very, very famous in the Arab world. So why does Rita's music so resonate with those living in Iran? Words of adoration for Rita can be found in Persian all over the internet. So I'd suggest that for many Iranians living under Ahmadinejad in 2011, when dissatisfaction with the political regime was at historical heights, Rita's new rendition of Persian songs on My Joys, all of her songs were popular before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And they evoke powerful nostalgic memories of an alternative and perhaps less isolated Iran. So hearing Rita sing these songs is quote-unquote music to their ears. Finally, Rita speaks about her music in very apolitical terms. She speaks about peace in general terms and dedicates her album to quote-unquote the language of Persian. She did suggest in one interview that if she was invited to Iran, she would be happy to sing a duet with Ahmadinejad. So I think this kind of, that's the most political that she gets. So I think this really, really helped her in addition. So I'm going to just move ahead and say there's no question that we can view Rita's recent album as a courageous act, bringing her Persian roots to a national stage in Israel. Accessing a culture from which you've been deliberately cut off is no easy task, however. Seeing Israel's biggest pop star attempt this task and making herself vulnerable by speaking imperfect Persian, broken Persian, and being forced to acknowledge that she didn't have a quote-unquote Persian education is a powerful sight to see on film. So I'm going to ask the director, George Yitzhak, to come up for... and Josephine Merzadeh, one of the characters. And I'm going to have a little discussion with them and then ask you to pose your own questions. First of all, I just want to say that all of the characters today, in Rita's film, in the Rita film, and in your film, they really provide a hopeful and inspiring representations of the way that art can be used by Iranian Jews in empowering ways. So that was a theme that we see throughout. George, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
As you can see, he's a very young filmmaker. I want to actually introduce who they are. So George Itzhak is a filmmaker originally from Uzbekistan and currently based in New York. He works in both narrative and documentary and has several projects in development and production that deal with issues of Russian immigration, Jewish life, and culture. He received his BFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Josephine Merzadeh, her artwork focuses on documenting a legacy of the past as it touches upon issues of displacement. Her art has been featured in the Light and Shadows exhibit that you can see here at Yeshiva University Museum. And that exhibit has been all over the world, and it has been viewed by over 120,000 people. And she was recently listed as one of the 36 under 36 in the New York's Jewish Week. So, George, can you speak a little bit, please, about how you chose first the characters, Josephine and Orly?
Well, my main kind of guiding principle in the casting process for this film was to find not two Persian Jewish women who are alike, who would give me the same story, but rather I wanted to focus on the differences between them. As you can see, there's a difference in age and background. Josephine was born in America, or was born in Iran, grew up in Israel. And really their outlooks on the work they do is quite different. Because I want to find two women who could kind of represent two sides of the Iranian diaspora. One, the side that was born to Iranian parents in America, and the other who immigrated, who lived through the revolution and immigrated to Israel. And beyond that, beyond those differences of background, I felt that their kind of balance of optimism and pessimism that we saw at the end really kind of highlighted, why these two women represent, both sides, both aspects of this diaspora and how they feel about their situation.
And how did you choose the topic in general, since you're not
Iranian?
Persian?
Yeah. It was really a mixture of things. Part of it is my personal background. My family is from Uzbekistan, so we lived among Muslims, so I kind of understood the Mizrahi experience in a sense. And even though I'm not Persian, as we saw, especially in the Rita film, nostalgia and longing, it's really universal. People, they cling to things, to music, to books, to objects from their past lives, and it really, it stays with them, and I can relate to that even if I'm not Persian. When Rita's uncle was crying, I understood those tears, even though I don't know his personal story. So beyond the personal background, I studied the topic a bit in school, in Mizrahi studies, Jewish-Muslim relations, but really the driving force to make this film happen in an encounter I had with an Iranian Muslim woman who I met. I think I must have been one of the first Jews she ever met. I met her abroad, so she hadn't really experienced the Jewish community in America. And she was so kind of taken by my perspective on Iran and Israel and the fact that I'm Jewish, but that I seemed more sympathetic to her than other Jews. She might have, imagined how they would have reacted. And she kind of said, you should really turn this into a film. This could happen, you and me are this perfect example of how people can exist and share beliefs and ideas and across boundaries and religions.
And can you speak about the title? Because actually, I thought that maybe one character was in Israel and one here, but actually I recently learned that they're both in the US. Both characters, one in Florida and Josephine here in New York. So can you talk a little bit about the title?
Yeah, so some may view it as kind of a misleading title, Tehran and Tel Aviv. We're in Florida and Long Island most of the time. It kind of relates back to this idea of longing, because all three characters, Rita, Josephine, and Orly, that we saw today, they use their music, their literature, and their art to kind of bring themselves back to where they're from, where their heart is really. So by naming the film, reading Tehran and Tel Aviv, kind of giving some tribute to these women who try to bring themselves back to when they were in Tehran, to when they were in Israel, to their roots.
So, a couple questions for you, Josephine. First of all, it's very exciting to have seen you on screen since I've known you for a few years now. So, really, really exciting. And also as a American, Persian, Jewish artist, a lot of overlapping themes. But you have a very, very different family background to my own, and I wanted to ask you to discuss a few of the issues that you brought up in particular. So first, your family's decision to send you to a Persian Muslim school, and maybe as a follow-up, do you think you would send your own children to the same kind of school?
Gali, that's a fantastic question to ask. You're welcome. My family's upbringing on a day-to-day basis had revolved around our personal identity, which was a running theme in our life, given the fact that my family had left all of their belongings in Iran, and there was always this very bitter sentiment that was in our household ever since I was a young child. And my family's decision in sending me to an Iranian Muslim school was because you must understand that they literally bequeathed all of their possessions to the Iranian regime. And the only valuables that they had at hand were really the memories and their uncompromising legacy, a 2,700-year-old legacy of Jewish identity in Iran predating Islam. And that was the gift that they had brought into the United States under the roof of American land. And it is with this ideology and this sense of connection that they possessed to who they were while living in the United States that they chose the gift to give me and sending me to an Iranian Muslim school. And the following question, would I send my children to a Persian Muslim school? I believe that it's every parent's role to instill specific values to their children. And giving a Jewish upbringing is something that's very significant and has to happen within the confines of someone's home. With that said, I also believe that it's important to give value and respect to who you are as an individual. And I give value and respect to my grandparents who are sitting up there in the corner, and my parents for going out of their way to go over and beyond in instilling what it means to be an Iranian. And yes, I would send my children to a Persian Muslim school because I have an innate responsibility. I am a generational bridge. I am the bridge between the generation in which my parents fled Iran, came to America, and I have that personal responsibility in holding on to the values and the traditions that they have given me. And I have to be able to give it to the next generation, either independently or with a spouse.
So, I guess my follow-up question is, why do you feel so passionately about this? And, the question is, I don't know actually the specific circumstances of how your parents left Iran. Maybe you could talk about that. I mean, was it after the Islamic Revolution or before?
My parents actually have a different story. They had left before the Iranian Revolution. My mom had gone to school in Switzerland, and my dad was here as well. During the time of the revolution, my grandparents were actually in Iran. So they were actually the ones who really had an understanding of, the cultural, the tension between the Jews and the Muslims that had taken place as a result of the revolution.
And so you've never been to Iran, but you feel so passionately about conveying this Iranian identity. Do you want to just maybe give us a little bit of maybe why still, with all of the, death to Israel and the way Iran has responded to
I honestly think that people should not compromise a legacy that's an extension of their being. I don't want to compromise that. I want it to grow. I want it to go from one generation to the next. And it's the reason why I've held on to my Persian identity and why it's so valuable to me is because of that bitter sentiment that my parents had always spoken to us about within our own home with regard to the revolution and leaving their material possessions, of which included photographs. Now, when I was a child, I'd always had this inclination towards storytelling and listening to people's stories, and the stories in which my family had, disclosed to me in the process of which leaving their possessions and coming to Iran. And those stories were never fully whole. There was always a missing component because I didn't have photographs. I had no pictures, I had no understanding of what my mom looked like when she was 14. I was always told she looked like me, but that was never enough to paint a picture. So I have to reinstate a story. I have to create that picture. And I do it through photography, I do it through my artistic work, and I do it a lot through the stories that my grandfather tells me.
I have many more questions, but we don't have a lot of time, so I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions.
There's someone up there.
I wanted to mention, I'm from Iran, and I came to this country in 1972 before the revolution. And I went to Creative School where it was an international school. There were lots and lots of people from different nationalities. And we had lots of discussions, political discussions, all kinds of discussions. It was a great atmosphere. We learned to respect our differences and similarities. And then when we came to this country to go to school, what was very interesting is that after a while, discussing politics became very, very difficult. So I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is A, there was a spirit of harmony and acceptance in Iran before the revolution, so it's not something new. I mean, not something that didn't exist, and it's all these bearded men who are, shaking fists and want Israel to go to hell. Most Iranians couldn't care less about what the government has in mind, and so I found that these films that you showed really, really touching, and I found that it was a wonderful way to reach out and reconnect to the sentiment that I am sure exists in Iran today as we speak, and as evidenced by the reactions that we had to these films.
Thank you.
And if I can just add, in my film, Orly talks about holidays, Nowruz and Charshan Vesuri, and how it really was a national thing to do. You're Iranian, you celebrate. It didn't matter, if you're Jewish, you can't celebrate these holidays. But I do want to note that, when Josephine went to the Charshan Vesuri party, and then when Orly went to the Nowruz party, they were one of the only Jews in a, maybe 85% Muslim audience.
Whose idea was that, by the way?
I engineered everything. And I'm actually glad that that kind of worked out that way, that I brought Josephine to a party where it was mostly Muslim, or Zoroastrian or Armenian people are there. So
it was actually a conglomerate. There were Baha'is, Christians, Iranians of all religious identity.
Yeah, and to show even though there weren't many Jews there, because for various reasons, now those communities don't mix here in America, but they could still, they could quote unquote blend in. They know the language, they're all part of the greater family.
It was a very powerful scene in the film. We have time for one last question. All the way in the back. Yes?
So, it was amazing evening to learn about the Iranian Jews, and thank you. And the documentary was fabulous, and the movie on It didn't touch anything. It's nice to know that the Jews and the Muslims lived, more in harmony without any dispute. discrimination, but I think I had a Iranian friend, Jewish friend, whose husband was a doctor, and she was being kind of used, and I think that the women are still considered the property of the men, so there is maybe not discrimination against one group and another in terms of religion, but I think that the women's role there is still, and I wonder what it's like today. This was like 30 years ago. But the women's role is still like the woman has to be subservient to the man.
I'm just going to quickly respond to that, if I can, because things have changed a lot since 1979, and Iran today is quite a different country than it was then. But I also don't think that the films portrayed things as being totally perfect, and I think that's what's sort of important about the films, is that it really wasn't perfect in Iran for Jews, but memory is a very peculiar thing, and we remember certain things as we like to. But both films talk about the reasons that these people had to actually leave Iran, because there were problems for Jews in Iran, but there were also a lot of amazing memories that people want to connect with, and that Iran remains to be a really important part of people's identity. And I'm afraid that we actually have to vacate this room for the next film. So I want to thank all of you so much.